I'm Tawfic in New York, and this is BBC World News America. In Russia, President Putin insists on immediate guarantees that NATO will not expand further to the east. Here in the U.S., a jury has found former police officer Kim Potter guilty of manslaughter over the shooting of Dante Wright. In Hong Kong, a statue commemorating the deaths of protesters in Beijing's Tiananmen Square has been removed from a university campus. It was one of the few remaining memorials in the city. Health officials are encouraging people to get booster shots in the face of Omicron, but in many countries, people are still struggling to get an initial vaccine. We have a special report. And during the pandemic, many people relocated to be closer to their families. But for many in Europe, that meant moving to a whole other country. We report from Poland. Welcome to World News America on PBS in the UK and around the globe. We start tonight in Russia, where President Vladimir Putin has insisted that the West must give Moscow guarantees that NATO will not expand its alliance eastwards and admit Ukraine as a member. The remarks came during a 4-hour-long press conference in which Mr. Putin stressed that Russia does not want conflict over Ukraine and rejected accusations that he was planning an invasion of the country. Well, this comes as thousands of Russian troops are now stationed along the country's border with Ukraine. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg is in Moscow for us tonight and has this report.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, if you happen to like long news conferences. Vladimir Putin's end-of-year press briefing is always a marathon affair. For 4 hours, the Kremlin leader fielded questions, and he used the event to vent his resentment at how NATO enlarged after the fall of the Soviet Union.
We won't move 1 inch towards the east, they told us in the 1990s. And what happened? They deceived us. They brazenly tricked us. There were 5 waves of NATO expansion, and now missile systems are appearing in Romania and Poland.
Is this Russia's response? A build-up of Russian troops near Ukraine's border. The Kremlin denies it plans to invade. But this is pressure, and on the West too, as Moscow demands an end to NATO enlargement and NATO military activity in Eastern Europe, what it calls security guarantees.
You must give us guarantees. You must do it immediately. Now. We won't be palmed off with decades of idle chatter about the need of security for all, while the other side carries out its own plans.
Vladimir Putin spoke for a long time, but gave little away about his intentions regarding Ukraine, about whether, as the West fears, he's planning a large-scale military operation there. But what we do know now is that next month, US and Russian officials will sit down to discuss the security guarantees that Moscow is demanding. So there's still hope for a diplomatic resolution. Vladimir Putin has done 17 of these press conferences now as president. You need plenty of stamina to do this and to listen to it. And since all main TV channels in Russia show it live, it's wall-to-wall Putin. A reminder, as if Russians didn't know it, of who's in charge here. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Now, here in the United States, a jury in the state of Minnesota has found a white former police officer guilty of manslaughter for having shot dead a black motorist. Now, during the trial, Kim Potter said she had mistaken her handgun for a taser when she killed Daunte Wright during a traffic stop in April. Here's a bit of her testimony.
I remember yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I shot him.
Joining me now for more on the story is the BBC's Nomia Iqbal. Now, Nomia, both the defense and prosecution agreed that she didn't mean to kill Daunte Wright, that she mistakenly withdrew the wrong weapon. So what were the key arguments that the jury was weighing?
Well, for the prosecutors, this was a case of a preventable death. They argued that this was a police officer of more than 20 years' experience, that she had to know the difference between a taser and her handgun. For the defence, they said that this was an honest mistake and that she was simply trying to arrest somebody who was resisting arrest. Now, it's worth mentioning that intent was not part of the charges, so the jurors didn't need to be convinced by the prosecution that Kim Potter had tried to kill Daunte Wright. Instead, this was all about whether she caused his death recklessly, whether she was conscious of causing death or great bodily harm. And after 27 hours, the jury of 6 men and 6 women came back and they backed the state's case.
You know, this was just as shocking for the fact when it happened, right in the middle of the Derek Chauvin trial, who was convicted of killing George Floyd, another man who was unarmed. So is there a sense that there's been a real shift now in finally holding police officers accountable?
It's interesting, Nada, because I think a lot of campaigners and certainly family that were outside court do feel that. And it's worth mentioning that convicting police officers in this country on these sorts of criminal charges is pretty rare, and there's lots of reasons for that. There's lots of laws protect the police's right to use force, backed by powerful police unions. Also, juries tend to not want to second-guess the actions or decisions a police officer takes when they're in the line of duty. And the Attorney General for Minnesota, Keith Ellison, spoke outside court when the verdict came out, and he said directly to the police, "We hold you in high record, but we also hold you to a high standard, and we don't want you to be discouraged by this." Now, when it comes to that sort of change. In Minnesota itself, you had the Derek Chauvin case and now Kim Potter. There has been some motion towards police reform, but you will get activists say that there's not really been any follow-through. And it's also worth mentioning that these sorts of cases are pretty high profile. Derek Chauvin, Kim Potter, they get lots of media attention. So whilst there is an accountability happening, I think it's probably fair to say it's probably not indicative of the country, where the country is at as a whole when it comes to that change that many people want on police accountability.
Okay, Nomia Iqbal, thank you so much. Now, in Hong Kong, a well-known statue that commemorates students who died in the pro-democracy Tiananmen Square protests has been removed from a college campus. Hong Kong University has defended its decision, but some of the students there have called the move cowardly. The statue was one of the last remaining Tiananmen memorials in the city. Now, the semi-autonomous city has had many of its freedoms eroded in recent years due to strict laws imposed by Beijing. The BBC's Danny Vincent has more from Hong Kong.
The painful expressions carved into this memorial were supposed to leave a long-lasting impression. The memories of the dead immortalised in copper and concrete. Beijing does not commemorate what happened on June 4th, 1989, but Hong Kong remembers.
This is a demonstration of our values. We Hong Kong people have been pursuing democracy and freedom. If it is demolished, it symbolises the Chinese Communist Party has won.
For 24 years, this statue has stood tall here on the campus of Hong Kong's oldest university. Etched into the monument are the faces of students killed in the crackdown in 1989. Hong Kong is the only place on Chinese soil that officially remembers the dead. This statue represents the right to remember.
This public memorial was removed away from public sight under the cover of darkness, then demolished, broken into pieces, away from public view. Hong Kong University said displaying the statue posed a legal risk to the institution. Hundreds, possibly thousands, were killed when the People's Liberation Army put a bloody end to months of pro-democracy protests in 1989. Activists say the authorities are now accelerating a campaign to erase public recollection in Hong Kong. Richard Troy ran a museum remembering June 4th. It's been raided by the police. Last week, he was jailed.
I still believe Hong Kong people, most of us still remember very well what happened in 1989. We still have our belief, what is the truth.
The pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong once believed in time it could help to transform China into a democracy. Activists say there is no longer space for dissent. Danny Vincent, BBC News, Hong Kong.
Across Europe, many countries are imposing new COVID restrictions to slow the spread of the Omicron variant. In Spain, a court has cleared the way for a nighttime curfew to be reimposed in badly hit parts of northern Catalonia. In Bulgaria, where vaccination rates are low, the government introduced financial incentives for people to get the jab. But Omicron is already causing cases to rise, and there are concerns that for much of Europe, many of these measures may be too little, too late. The BBC's Europe correspondent Nick Beek has more.
The festive message to Spaniards this year: wear a mask, even outside. Across Europe, governments are issuing health warnings rather than glad tidings. At a time when families come together, the advice is to keep your distance.
Going for your birthday.
Belgium is now inviting children as young as 5 to get vaccinated. COVID cases here have been falling for the past 10 days, but cinemas and theatres are set to close, although pubs will stay open.
It's really a political choice that is not really supported by scientific.
I feel like there are rules, but no one really cares, so...
It helps me to study that all the nightclubs are closed.
Exhausted doctors and nurses are pleading with the public to follow the rules.
The measures have their effect, and they permit us professionals to continue in our hospitals to take care of all kinds of patients, and not only patients having COVID. So really, I know the measures are weighing on all of us, but they are so important to be able to keep our health system standing up.
Medical staff here and across Europe are unanimous that getting more people boosted is vital in the fight against the new variant. But what we don't yet know is how the early studies coming from the UK suggesting Omicron is milder will affect the decision-making of individual European countries in the coming days and weeks. COVID rates across the continent have been spiralling. Denmark has the highest, followed by the UK. But France, Spain, Italy have all seen a surge, as well as Germany. And there's been anger in Munich at tighter controls, which have targeted the unvaccinated. Police kept order at a time when most UK visitors are being kept out of the country. But travel bans, which France has also introduced and scuppered British getaways, won't work, according to the World Health Organization. It argues specific local measures, such as those introduced in Spain and Italy today on face coverings, are much better. As ever, the politics of the pandemic can take some navigating. As the last-minute shoppers venture out, the general message from Europe's leaders: we wish you a cautious Christmas and a reined-in New Year. Nick Beek, BBC News, Brussels.
Well, as countries across Europe discuss lockdowns and booster shots, many people across the world are struggling to even get their first shot of the coronavirus vaccine. Yesterday, the head of the World Health Organization called for vaccines to be shared more equally. He warned that prioritizing booster programs in wealthy nations would more likely prolong this pandemic than end it. The BBC's Naomi Grimley has more.
2021 was the year 8 billion vaccines were administered across the world, but the vast majority have been given in richer countries. Only 1 in 4 African healthcare workers have been vaccinated, for example. And a former British Prime Minister thinks that should shame us all.
It's really a stain on our global soul, because we've had a surplus of vaccines created in one part of the world and indeed stockpiling. And we've got a severe shortage in the other part of the world where only 3% have been vaccinated in low-income countries. And it affects us all, because I think people are starting to realize that if we allow the disease to spread in poor countries and then mutate, it comes back and it haunts even the fully vaccinated.
Mr. Brown wants world leaders to try again at the start of the new year to make vaccination across the world a priority. The World Health Organization says 98 countries haven't been able to meet the target of vaccinating 40% of their populations by the end of the year. Without more progress, WHO officials are warning the pandemic will drag on for longer.
Getting the vaccines to those who need them most in all countries must be a priority for every single government, not just some. We need to also be able to use tools to drive transmission down, because if we don't, we will continue to see the virus change and the virus threaten us in ways that will bring us closer to the beginning rather than closer to the end.
2022 will see us enter the 3rd year of the pandemic. But the question remains, will it be the year that vaccines finally become available everywhere? Naomi Grimley, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at some other news. Ecuador has made it mandatory for people within the country to get the coronavirus vaccine following the arrival of the Omicron variant. Now, while dozens of countries have introduced new health measures in recent weeks, very few of them have outright mandated that people receive the vaccine. The American author Joan Didion, whose career chronicled the mood and chaos of life in the 1960s and 70s, has died at the age of 87. Her publisher said the cause was Parkinson's disease. Didion is largely credited with ushering in the new journalism genre of literary nonfiction, mining her richest material from her native California. Ethiopia says its troops have been ordered not to advance into the Tigray region. It comes after Tigrayan rebels called for a ceasefire and negotiations, which have ignited hope that they could lead to a resolution to the war in northern Ethiopia. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's program. Striking a pose, we meet a man who's using the art of photography to tackle and express his mental health. In the UK, there has been a new warning from the organisation representing gas suppliers that gas and electricity bills could rise by as much as 50% next year. That's unless the government steps in. The BBC's Coletta Smith has more.
We're feeling these price rises in all kinds of areas. It's worth remembering that lots of our power stations across the UK are actually fuelled by gas, like this one behind me, to produce electricity, which is why we're talking about price rises in gas and electricity. Businesses are already paying those high prices, and they're passing that on to us as customers by charging us more for pretty much everything we're buying at the moment. But households are being shielded quite effectively at the moment because of the price cap. Now, it might not feel like it because it went up dramatically in the autumn, but that price is now fixed for the next 6 months. It's not going to be until April until we see another change. But unfortunately, it's only going in one direction because of this increase in wholesale prices now, which will fuel a rise in the spring.
During this pandemic, thousands of people across the United States have given up life in big cities and decided to live in other parts of the country, often to be closer to their families. Well, in Europe, a similar phenomenon is happening, but instead of moving from city to city, some people are shifting from country to country. Many Polish people who moved to the UK years ago in search of better jobs have now decided to move back. Our correspondent Adam Easton reports.
I feel safe here. That's something I didn't have in the UK.
Cosmetics student Dorota Jędrzejewska is talking about that secure feeling that being near family and close friends often brings.
And that's Nana and her sister, grandmother and her sister.
A law graduate, she lived in the UK for 12 years doing a variety of jobs. In January, she rushed back to her home city of Łódź, just in time to say goodbye to her dying grandmother.
I grew up here in this flat, and my Nana used to teach me how to skate. Granddad used to teach me how to cycle. So, yeah, all sorts of wonderful memories.
Since 2004, hundreds of thousands of people here have left for the UK seeking better paid jobs. Since then, we've had Brexit, the COVID pandemic, and people are missing their families and are returning home. The number of Poles living in the UK now is at its lowest for 8 years.
Monika and Frideric Conde had well-paid jobs in London for more than 6 years. They loved the city, their children were born there, but the high cost of raising a family there persuaded them to come home to Warsaw.
And I was sure that in Poland I could easily find a nice nursery where I can just send them and, you know, spend like 5-6 hours at home working. And in London, actually, we were not able to find like a nice nursery.
Professor Izabela Grabowska has interviewed hundreds of Poles who have recently returned. Most want to stay, but some, after years abroad, now feel uncomfortable in their homeland.
1/3 out of our 500 returnees sample said that we do consider return to the UK or to other countries because they do not feel at home anymore.
In recent months, Poland has seen a surge in the number of mostly Middle Eastern people trying to enter the EU illegally from Belarus. Most Poles support the government's refusal to let them in, but Gosia Prochal says her years living in Britain has affected the way she sees migrants.
Living abroad and as well being a migrant by myself gave me that feeling, kind of an empathy for the people who are now on the border with Belarus. They are in terrible conditions. We should treat those people equally.
After years of living abroad, these Poles are bringing with them new skills and life experiences that may shape the country's economy and its politics. Adam Easton, BBC News, Warsaw.
Now, preserving your mental health can take a number of different forms. For Benji Reid, it's art. The award-winning photographer has a new exhibition in London called Laughing at Gravity. Reid says the show depicts how he's handled adversity and discrimination in his day-to-day life. He's been speaking to the BBC's Yvette Twagira Maria.
This is Laugh at Gravity, the first solo show exhibition by the award-winning photographer Benji Reid.
One of the challenges is that when I first started, I didn't have many people to sit for me. So then I became the sitter for my work. So I became the subject and the artist. And then I had to figure out what my relationship is with my own body. And in many of the shots, if you look at them, I'm not really looking at the camera. I'm always looking away, so the face is a mask, the body is a canvas.
Laugh at Gravity, amongst many of his work, shines light on the Black British experience and communicates that to a worldwide audience.
Laugh at Gravity. What did you mean by that? Why such a title?
Well, for me, gravity really was a metaphor for oppression, for racism, for police brutality, for the fact that we are being thrown into prisons more often than our white counterparts and put into mental institutes more than our white counterparts. So the gravity is really living under white oppression, basically. A Laugh at Gravity is about me laughing in the face of adversity. So that's really where we're coming from.
Inspired by his own personal experience, some of the themes in his work are mental health and fatherhood. This image, called Holding On to the Daddy, was the winner of the Wellcome Trust Mental Health category 2020.
Can you tell us more about your award-winning piece, Holding On to Daddy?
The image depicts me flying or attempting to fly out of my room with my daughter tethered to me by a piece of rope while she's playing a game. And what I wanted to explore in that work was the duality of fatherhood, that one, you can still be suffering from depression or post-traumatic stress, but still got the duties of fatherhood. It's about the reversal of roles, that my daughter is the one that is grounded, because that's how she was when I was going through my worst states.
Powerful photography there. And before we go, with Christmas just around the corner, we wanted to look at how some are spreading the holiday cheer around the globe. In Jerusalem, Santa ditched the reindeers and made an appearance on a camel. He rode through the old city walls, distributing Christmas trees to residents in the Holy Land. And in Rome, Santa's rappelled down the pediatric ward of a hospital to visit children there over the holidays. They made it all the way from the chimney to the inside of the hospital, where they delivered the gifts. Well, remember, you can find everything on our website. I'm Tawfic. Thanks for watching BBC World News America.